Hey everyone, this is Evelyn, and thank you for joining me here on Reppin. For those of you who are new, where have you been? I'm glad to have you here. Reppin is a podcast where we dive into stories that matter, voices that inspire, and the people who are changing the way we see the world. And we're kicking off our first episode of 2026 with an absolute legend. I am so excited for today's conversation with a true Hollywood icon, producer Janet Yang. Janet is an Emmy and Golden Globe winning producer and the former president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. You know, the Oscars? Boom. And she's a longtime trailblazer and advocate for the AAPI community. You know her work: The Joy Luck Club, The People versus Larry Flynt, Over the Moon, and more. These are films that didn't just entertain, but they delivered powerful storytelling and brought in the kinds of stories we get to experience. She's built an amazing career creating work that connects people and builds real community through film. This episode is especially meaningful to me. Talking with Janet, someone who has opened the door for Asian Americans in Hollywood, created space for women, and have given audiences like me a film like The Joy Luck Club, it was the only one where I could truly see myself. It's such a wonderful opportunity. Janet's going to take us behind her latest project, the powerful documentary, The Rose, Come Back to Me. It follows the rise of The Rose, a Korean indie rock band with roots in the Kpop training system. After building a global fan base and breaking out on their own terms, the band faced a label dispute that forced a years-long hiatus. Now they're back with a huge comeback tour, and the film gives an intimate, all-access look at their journey, their friendship, their courage, and their determination to create music on their own terms. We're going to talk about Janet's journey from childhood challenges to becoming a trailblazer in film, why representation still matters today, and how music, culture, and film can connect people across borders. And just a heads up, The Rose, Come Back to Me hits theaters this weekend, February 14th. It's a film you won't want to miss. This conversation is candid and a reminder that our voices and our stories are powerful. So let's go. I had wanted a nose job because I didn't like the way I looked.
Oh, of course. I would
Yeah.
do this in front of the mirror, like trying to make my eyes rounder.
Rough and rugged.
Represent NY, hold it down for my peeps. New York, New York. We rep the hardest. Hardcore. Nobody harder. Let them know. That's the way we rock it. Show me what you got.
Janet, thank you so much for being on the show. I can't tell you how much this means to me.
Well,
I'm so grateful for this podcast because it allows me to be able to connect with people that are just, thought leaders, incredible human being, and you're certainly somebody that fits that role. You have impacted the entertainment industry, the media industry, the Asian community. So thank you so much for being on the show. How are you and LA?
well, I would say I am personally fine, more than fine. Los Angeles in general is probably at a lower point than it has been in a while due to the fires and due to the shrinkage of work for a lot of
Yes.
people. But I am very grateful to Los Angeles. It's given me an incredible life that I never imagined I could have. So I'm certainly not going to complain. I did have a loft in New York. I have one regret in my life. Well, I bought a loft on Franklin Street between Hudson and Greenwich for $135,000.
No way. You can't get coffee for that price at this point.
And this is the 1980s, and I happily lived there for a while until I the first half of the 80s. And then work called first to San Francisco and then to Los Angeles. And I kept thinking, well, I'm going to go back, and I rented out the loft for, a period of time. And I was going back and forth in the mid 90s or so. I was like, my life seems to be in Los Angeles.
Wait, so you gave up that loft,
I
right?
sold it. I know, stop making me feel worse.
Listen, you're still sitting in 80-degree weather, but you're always welcome back to
Thank
New York
you.
anytime. I love that you're a native New Yorker. You've had an incredible impact on the entertainment industry, bringing iconic films like The People versus Larry Flynt, certainly The Joy Luck Club, which was groundbreaking, and now you're behind an incredible documentary called The Rose, Come Back to Me. What was it about this particular project, this documentary, that made you say, this is a story that needs to be told?
Well, I'm always on the lookout for great stories about Asians. I think that's what still propels me, having grown up with never seeing anyone that looked like us on screen or behind the camera.
Yeah.
And I fantasized that one day that would no longer be the case. It was a very funny thing. The managers of The Rose, the then managers, Transparent Arts, which in it of itself, I think you may know this, was born out of a group called Far East Movement. In the process of hearing about this band, which I really knew little about, I started listening to the music. I was like, oh, well, just for due diligence, I should try to, find out more about who they are. And I kind of fell in love with their music. And then I had this weird idea, which sometimes happens to me, not infrequently actually, where it's like there's apparently a phenomenon about this where you have a memory of something that happens in the future. Because not that long ago, I read an article in Popular Mechanics, of all things. Anyway, I read this article that just popped up that explained what I think I experienced, which is that you sometimes have a memory of something that happens in the future. And this is a scientific magazine, so I kind of believe it. I told the managers, it just popped out of my mouth. I didn't even know what I was saying. I was like, oh, we should make a documentary about the band. And that's
Okay.
what started it. And he's like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so I had this idea, and he's like, they're open to it. But I was absolutely convinced there would be a documentary made. And it was not premeditated. It was like just a flash. Then I approached a documentarian. I mean, I was still president of the Academy at the time. I knew I didn't have time to dig in and be the sort of the day-to-day producer. And also there's so many great documentary producers. And I approached one of them. Her name is Diane Quan. I was like, Diane, what do you think?
Awesome, Diane.
Yes, love Diane. I was actually walking with her in New York at the Tribeca Film Festival. So it was
okay.
See, back to New York. Anything to get to New York. And I was with an old friend of mine who is also a governor in the documentary press, Chen. She's worked on incredible documentaries. I met her when she was a student at NYU, and I had just come back from China, and I helped a young man who is now living with my parents in the suburbs of New York, who popped the question one day and said, I want to make a movie. I was feeling a little bit burdened because he was this grown person, but who didn't speak English and knew nothing about America. And we're sitting at my parents' house, like, I want to make a documentary. And I literally said, well, Yaping, what? I was already like, what? Now you want to, you just got here. I have to help you go food shopping. And where are you going to get the money for that? And he looks around at my parents' neighborhood, which is now Scarsdale. That's not where I grew up. I grew up in a more sort of middle class, neighborhood, born in Queens. Anyway, he said, this is a rich neighborhood. I bet your neighbors have money. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a little bit going off on a tangent, but I wanted to bring Jean Chan into the mix because I love her. So he came, he was like walking through the neighborhood. We don't even know who our neighbors are because everyone's hidden behind hedges. And he comes back, Janet, guess what? Your neighbor, something, I think I'm getting the name, Fred Durst. I think it's a Durst. but they own like half of Manhattan real estate. I met neighbor something said Mr. Durst. He invited us over for dinner, and before we knew it, he wrote a check. And
Oh,
then he comes
wow.
back another day and says, "Guess what? Your neighbor Seymour and Audrey Topping." And then we were at their place for dinner, and he wrote a check. And it taught me something, which is that because he was fresh off the boat, so to speak, from China, people were so curious, and he had such an innocence and very disarming way, like, "Hi, my name Yaping. I'm from China." And then he
Right.
just start chatting them up. And I guess that was unusual for a high level
Yeah.
suburb. Anyway,
I think that'd be unusual now
it
still.
but before I knew it, and then my parents were like, "Well, if our neighbor's putting money, we have to." And then they got their friends to do it. And we decided to make this documentary, which he wanted to drive across America. He's like, America through Chinese eyes. It's so funny because in China at the time, the only cars that existed on the road were red flag limousines. They were all for like officials. So he bought himself the closest thing to that, which is the black used Cadillac to drive across. Okay, it gets better because this was the concept. I was like, Yaping, you barely speak English. And so then we decided we needed some bilingual crew. We needed someone for
Yeah.
him to talk to on camera. I had met an actress, the first actress to leave China, who was studying at NYU. She's like, "That sounds great." And then she said, "There are other bilingual people I know at NYU. There's Jean Chen, and then there's Eric Lau from Hong Kong, and there's Ang Lee." So this is now our crew. And we
Oh
made
my
a
gosh.
documentary in the mid 80s. When you look at it now, it's very crudely made. Ang was our sound man, and I tease him up. He was a terrible sound man. And he was like, "No, I wasn't." Oh, it's good. So you were pretty bad.
You know,
Anyway,
yeah, it's good that he made something of himself.
yeah. Everybody got along really well and had a fun time, although he almost got Ang killed because he was driving a van that nobody else would drive with faulty brakes, and he's like driving down the Rocky Mountains.
I need to get all these stories.
We had a crazy, another person that is in the doc just because my friend Yaping walked up to him at the airport. I watched the whole thing. He was like, "Hi, my name's Yaping," and he's talking to Muhammad Ali. The next thing you know, we're at Muhammad Ali's house. He's doing magic tricks for us.
That's so
That's
wild.
a wild, crazy story
Oh my
that we
God.
love. We've had a couple of reunions. We're like, we were so crazy.
What an incredible group. Oh my God, I need to get all of these stories over adult beverages and like offline so you could speak freely. I actually saw this film, The Rose, the documentary at
Okay.
Tribeca.
Oh,
And I love Diane and Eugene, who's a guest on the show. Eugene is the director. I think the thing about this documentary for me that really resonated, which struck on many levels, and you let me know if these are some of the themes that you were interested in highlighting, Janet. Not only is this just a great band, there's obviously an explosion of K-pop right now, but they're really a rock band, The Rose. What's incredible about these guys is they are all real artists and musicians. They play their own instruments. I believe they write their own stuff as well.
yes.
They produce their own things. Like you, I didn't grow up seeing anyone like me. I think I saw more Planet of the Apes, you know, and I've said this before, like I grew up watching Coneheads, and at that point I didn't speak English. So I didn't know what was going on because it's live action.
Wait, now I want to know, where were
Yeah.
you born?
I was born in New York, but when I was growing up, I spoke Chinese. So I had to learn English through TV, like watching Mr. Rogers.
Did you grow up in like Chinatown?
No, I grew up in the burbs
Oh,
of New York. My parents were only shuttling me back and forth from like Chinatown on weekends, and I was just really at home. So I had to learn how to speak English. So I never saw anyone that looked like us at all. And to see a Korean band, I mean, the explosion of K-pop to me, like it was made my head spin. I didn't understand what was
yeah,
happening.
yeah.
But also with this film, what was incredible is a lot of the values that these guys hold of friendship, of honor, of trusting each other. At points there were issues, political issues within the record company that one They sort of wanted to play one member versus the other, and they kind of stuck together. And there was a real strength in character and integrity. Can you talk about some of the values that the film highlights? And was that something that you wanted to spotlight because you have had a long history of championing stories that need to be told, voices and perspectives that need that exposure? Is that something that you wanted to do with The Rose?
I'm not sure I knew exactly what the themes would
Right.
be. I knew there was something special about them. It was
Mm-hmm.
hard to explain. They had a tenderness. You know, I
Mm.
saw videos, I met with them. I detected something that was just very human and sweet and humble. But then the music was where they really expressed themselves, and it just there was something that the tunes were catchy. I found them, you know, I found the songs in my head just playing over and over again, and it's a vibe. I can't
Yeah.
explain it. It's so funny because I just got back from Sundance, and Chloe Zhao said something that I related to so much because it's sort of been how I operate. She says, I don't look at resumes, I meet with people because you have to get the vibe. And I look at resumes, but it's like, it's not the most important thing by any means. It's about a person as a vibe. And I think I could go on a lot about, you know, what's happening with new technology and
Mm-hmm.
people losing their instincts and their intuition. I have only lived off that. I mean, there's so many things that have happened in my life that are so illogical or irrational, but yet I was relying on my instincts. And I think that was the same thing with Rose. And I really credit Eugene and Diane so much for unveiling so much of what they, you know, ultimately showed about themselves, you know, having the individual interviews with them. I think they were
Yeah.
surprised how much they ended up revealing because most people deserve to be interviewed in a way to get the full story. In other words, it's you need the right circumstances, you need the right atmosphere and prompting. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what they did such a good job doing is prompting them in a certain way that felt safe and
Yeah.
that they discovered certain things about themselves in the process. When we started shooting them, you know, Coachella was not on the table. We had no idea that was going to
Yeah.
happen. SoFi, all of that, they kind of blew up in the course of the making of the doc, which is a good
Yeah.
thing. I mean, I have huge amount of respect for documentarians who go into a project mostly not knowing what the ending's going to be.
Yeah.
Again, instinct. There's something there. There's something there. You have to find it. You don't know. It reveals itself.
Yeah.
So different from working on narrative films. I think we got super lucky.
It really is such an incredible film on so many layers. But do you also I mean, I know I'm not the only one that's come up to you and said, these are films that we need to see, like the Joy Luck Club, again, The Rose. It's the fact that, you know, they just happen to be Korean, but to be able to see
Yeah.
somebody that looks like us that have similar experiences and struggles, I think that's so critically important. But for you, when you were growing up, you were saying you didn't see anyone ever looking like us. Can you talk about some of the seminal moments that you might have had where you recognized or you were made aware that you were Asian? How did it sort of inform you? How did you sort of overcome some of those stereotypes and stigmas?
It's interesting because I've been writing a lot about some of my memories from the past because I too am curious. I have a little more time now after the kind of jobs like to reflect.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly in second grade, this was a kind of pivotal moment. First of all, I loved my teacher. She was blonde. She had like
Mm-hmm.
perfectly coiffed hair and blue eyes. And I just worked, she was so pretty and she was kind of funny and spunky. Anyway, she told us one day, she said, everybody go home and look for a great baby picture of yourself. And we're like, okay, that sounds like a fun exercise. So I'm rummaging through things, back in the day. There weren't that many photos. We didn't have like 500 photos of every meal you ate. So
That's now. Yeah.
that's now. This is then. And every picture is kind of precious, right? So we come back to class and we didn't really know what she was going to do with these photos. She's like, okay, we're going to play a game. This is now at the end of the class period. We're going to throw up the picture on this overhead projector, which is the highest form of technology we had at the time. And then you're going to guess who's who. And everybody's like, oh, that's exciting. And, one photo would go up and I'm like, I don't know, is that Tommy or Freddie or Billy or
Right.
and then my picture comes up and everybody literally just bursts out laughing. And then she's on to the next. In other words, I was the only Asian person in class.
Right.
The only non-white person. In fact, it was a little devastating to me at the time that I really was so instantly made an other, and it wasn't a mean laugh. It was just like, oh, duh, who's that? I didn't realize until that moment how absolutely automatically different I looked from everybody else. So that was a big wake up call. And then I sometimes got teased on the bus, ching chang chung Chinese.
Yeah.
And another incident that I recall is like I really love the book Anne Frank,
Mhm.
the Diary of Anne Frank. And then in 5th grade, we were going to put on a play. And the teacher said, okay, whoever wants to volunteer to play a certain role, raise your hand. And I'd read that book like again and again and again. It was like the most romantic thing I'd read at that age, because she's like falling in love with this other guy. So there were a couple of people who wanted to play Anne, and I raised my hand. And then the other student said, oh, well, I think if we cast Janet, people would snicker. So I knew what she meant. And that was, I guess, what you'd call a microaggression. Just little things like that. A lot of bullying, a lot of just feeling super self-conscious.
I understand
being
that.
embarrassed about the food. We had to write down for health class everything we ate. And it's like, I looked at what we ate for dinner and I couldn't even describe it. I'm like, what is the squiggly pieces of meat with the little green thing?
Right,
so
right.
I just had to make it up. Like I was like, it's hamburger. It's a
Right.
fried chicken.
Right. Just to belong.
Yeah.
So when you got that, I mean, look, I definitely can share a lot of that, those experiences. When Pretty in Pink came out, was it Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles? And Long Duck Dong.
Yeah.
I mean, I was called that like 100 times a day.
Oof.
It was humiliating when you're like in that age and you didn't know.
You're so sensitive. You so want to belong.
Yeah. And you don't know who you are. You have no life experience.
And then you know what you're not, like all my friends had bar mitzvahs and bas mitzvahs.
Right.
And they seders, and I went to seders. I'm like, okay, that's not me, but therefore what am I? And so you compartmentalize your life. So I had my private life. And that kind of leads to Joy Luck Club, because that was the first time I felt like my private life was exposed. So like we had the home life. And yes, friends would come over. They, later, much later in life, they're like, we love the Chinese meals that you had, but I was kind of embarrassed.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And I was like, okay, if you want to, my parents were like, invite your friends over for dinner. I'm like, okay, but, all the little, we had an IE,
like an aunt.
And yes, a nanny, chef, the house cleaner, whatever, who's then, because my mother worked at the United Nations. And she was a Chinese citizen for most of her life, and she was treated like an expat. So they paid for some of our education and things like being able to invite, a nanny in to live with us, et cetera, et cetera. And she'd be shuffling around in her slippers. And there were so many things that were like cringy. My parents sometimes hung
clothes.
They would hang chickens and duck to dry.
Yes, my dad did the Chinese sausage in the garage. I was like, what is this? Lapchung? I mean, do you speak Mandarin or Cantonese?
I speak Mandarin.
Okay, I'm Cantonese. Yeah, but the Chinese sausage, lapchung, I was like,
I know. There's Chinese sausages, everything was like,
yeah.
Of course, now it's
You're like,
I know what that is. Everyone. so like fascinated by food,
But
and
that's
they know more.
because of you and people like you that have just continued to change the narrative. I mean, you're saying all of these things, and Janet, honestly, I'm still, as a full grown adult, I'm still wrestling with like being skittish about showing all of that. I know that I've had a conversation with Osric Chow, an actor, that I was like,
Yeah.
for the first time publicly said I had wanted a nose job because I didn't like
Oh,
the way I looked.
oh, of course. I would do
Yeah,
this in front of the mirror, like try to make my eyes rounder,
exactly. Exactly.
you know?
I mean, so I hear you because I would imagine that you have internalized a lot of that. So how did you overcome some of those painful moments where you felt like an other?
I think a turning point for me was when I visited China for the first time with my mother in 1972, right after Nixon and Kissinger. It's hard to almost explain to people who weren't alive at the time, but U.S. and China were as far apart as
Yeah,
two countries could be. China was going through its cultural revolution, and it was pretty isolated. And my parents, who had left in the 40s, basically said, "We don't think we'll ever be able to visit China." They left as students, had every expectation of going back, and then the regime changed, and then their relatives said, "Oh, don't come back now." They could have gone back, but
yeah, but it was dicey.
it was a bit dicey. People were scared, and my mother worked at the United Nations, as I mentioned, and so then they accused her of being a spy. Everything about their lives was not in favor at the time. They had higher
Correct.
education, they lived abroad, and then my mother worked at the United Nations. So all of these were points against them. So they're like, okay, we're probably, and they never said a proper goodbye to their relatives. And then suddenly, 35 years later, Nixon and Kissinger go to China, and the Chinese ambassador to UN gathered all the Chinese citizens, the overseas Chinese, and said, "We really want you to have the opportunity to visit China." It makes me cry to think about this. You probably really miss them. And I probably, he was like apparently very charming and funny, my mother said, and he convinced them that they would be safe. That was the main message. But most people still didn't feel safe. But my mother was so desperately to see her relatives. So we're gonna go. We're gonna go no matter what. And then my parents decided it was better if we went on two separate trips. I'm the youngest of three. So my mother and I went first, and then my father, sister, and brother would go after us. And back then we were hauling. China was quite poor at the time, and when we asked them what they wanted like basic things like cloth, rice, flour, you
Hmm.
know, just really
So you were
basic
like
things.
importing all
We're,
that
we're
stuff home.
hauling these things. It was like
Yeah.
a classic overseas Chinese
Yep. Got it.
pilgrimage. You'd go to Hong Kong, you'd buy all this stuff, they would ship it. Although I didn't realize it at the time, it felt like just a blip. I was 15 at the time. I went to, a very impressionable age. Went to China with my mother, met dozens and dozens of relatives that I never met before. And then something was changed, but I didn't yet know what. But I just the curiosity about China, because they kept sort of saying maybe we'll go back to China. Like I could have grown up in China. My parents argued about this. Apparently, my father did not want to go back. My mother did want to go back, just because on an emotional level she missed her family so much. My father being more pragmatic, was like, no, we're staying in America. It's better here. Something got stirred in me in that trip, and then later on, when I went to college, I decided to study Chinese. I couldn't think of anything I wanted to do. All I knew, as I told people, was like, I don't want a 9 to 5 job. That's what I told them. They're
Right.
like, what do you want to do? I knew I didn't want the traditional job. I didn't want the office job where I'd just be sitting in office. I knew I gravitated toward the humanities and social
Hmm.
sciences. I wasn't a STEM person. So in college, I just decided to dive into Chinese studies. I was like, well, this is actually something for my own personal enrichment. I'll learn about China and the history, and then by extension, international relations and just a kind of area. Like I just had a vague notion of like an area
Hmm.
I was interested in, because again, it never occurred to me that I could work in movies.
Was it because of The fact that we didn't see anyone like that? Or was it because we were immigrants?
Because it just, living in New York, so far from Los Angeles, I never saw anybody. There was no role model. Connie Chung
Yeah,
and Bruce Lee,
that's it.
maybe, had sort of, was in my consciousness, but there wasn't.
Yeah.
So I did think about journalism. I was like, well, I kind of want to travel the world. And back then, there were certain carved out paths that you were supposed to follow. It's not like today where like
Yeah.
anything goes. It's like doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher, nurse,
Preaching
blah,
to the
blah, blah.
choir. Preaching to
You
the
know,
choir. Yep.
and that's why it's so funny to talk to so many people in our community, from like Ken Jong to I think even Simu Liu, or so many people like, oh yeah, I start out pre-med.
I started as an accounting major. I can't
You
add to
did.
save my life.
You're a bad Asian.
I'm a very bad Asian. I use an app to figure out the lunch bill. I failed math 3 times
I
in high
used to be
school.
really good at math, but my math brain is atrophied, like totally atrophied. I'm like, I know, same thing.
Janet,
How
you are, I think you are okay. I don't need to worry about you. And I'm glad that Ang Lee is no longer in the sound department. I think things fell the way they were supposed to fall.
it worked out okay.
You did well. Yeah.
Anyway, that trip then triggered a lot of other things, curiosity. So then after I graduated from college, I went to graduate school for 1 semester at the University of Michigan, thinking that I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to continue staying in school. But it was while I was there that US-China relations were normalized. And suddenly I'm thinking, what am I doing? What the heck am I doing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when I could be going to China? So I left grad school, and I had already told a number of people that my teachers, I had one teacher in particular that I was very close to. I graduated from Brown, but I took classes at Harvard because they had a lot more classes in my field. And one teacher who was from China, a language teacher, I told her and anybody else I knew who had connections to China, I was like, can you help me find a job in China? Can you help me get over there? I want to go live. And she did. So I had moved to New York from Michigan. I was working at a publishing company. I was at a magazine actually called Book Digest. It was actually a pretty cool job. And I'd been doing that job for about a year when my teacher from Harvard, Chen Xiang was her name, said, Janet, I found you a job in Beijing. And it was perfect for you because it's in publishing and you can say that you work in publishing, and they need people to translate and edit because they publish books and magazines for export in different languages. And said you could be in the English language division. I'm like, oh my God, that's just too perfect. And they were creating a position that was not the classic foreign expert job that the Russians created in China. Like in the 50s, the Russians were teaching China how to be good communists, built hotels like the Friendship Hotel for them, and they built like a friendship store so that they could shop there. And they kind of reconstructed China in terms of this big Soviet style buildings. Not my favorite, I have to say. They had a huge amount of influence, and they created these foreign expert positions. So they said this would not be the classic foreign expert position where we pay a ton of money in foreign currency for you to live in this hotel. We want you to be a foreign worker closer to the Chinese because you are of Chinese extraction, and we're going to pay it in local currency. But you live in a dormitory with other Chinese. I'm like, okay, whatever. I didn't know. Fine, I'll do that. I was young. And so off I went to live in Beijing in March of 1980.
I mean, I love that you embedded and you felt the draw to go back to our culture. I think I shared with you when we talked on the phone, like, I didn't have a palpable sense of pride of being Asian until recently.
Be proud.
I am so proud. I'm
Be
so proud.
proud.
I owe a lot to you for a lot of reasons. You opened the door for Asian women and Asians to work in the entertainment industry. It was a little easier for me to get a job as an Asian American woman. And also, you gave me the Joy Luck Club, which I, again, never saw anyone that looked like me. And then I think I remember going to see the film and thinking, wait a second, this story had so many nuances that just almost felt like you reached into my personal home life and brought it into the film.
Yes, that's exactly what I felt when I read the book. I'm like, wait, wait,
Yeah.
wait. It was kind of scary at first. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, they know
I
so much.
felt exposed almost.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt. I was like exposed in a way that
Yeah.
was thrilling and terrifying at the same time.
Yes, exactly. And I think there was one scene that was like she brings home the white boyfriend and then like the mom is like, "Oh, this is a terrible dish."
This is
But that's like humility, right? And he's like, "It's okay, it just needs more soy sauce." And you're just
you're
like,
cringing. That scene, that is my mother to the, I literally was just writing about that because Chinese food requires a lot of sleight of hand. Everything's hot. Like you have to get this on the table and this and this.
yes.
Blah, 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 blah. And I watched my mother like that, but it was the same thing. Oh, take up. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what? What? You just slaved away and you're feeding like if you would we would have like dinner parties of 30, 40 people. And just like, oh, sorry, this is exactly my mother.
Totally. And that
Yeah.
was the first time that I ever felt, again, to your point, thrilled and also so exposed and a little bit, I was like kind of shrinking in my
I
seat a
know,
little
like,
bit.
will people now know? People, like, would just
Yeah.
rip the Band-Aid off.
That was the first time that I felt seen and I just sort of didn't know what to do. I felt like naked. Unfortunately, we had to wait 20 something years for the Crazy Rich Asians to come out.
Yeah.
When you had those personal experiences of feeling the sting of being an other,
Yeah.
being called out, being different, and then going to Beijing and embracing your culture. How did you bring those personal experiences into the work that you do to give us films like The Rose,
Yeah.
Joy Luck Club?
Yeah. I like to say that we're all trying to heal our childhood wounds, and being in China, although in some ways I was even more self-conscious, but in other ways I was much less self-conscious. Like I could be among crowds of people and know that I blended in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when push came to shove, meaning when I had to sort of decide, because China at the time was still pretty closed off and there were very few non-Chinese there, and so few in fact that they thought I was local. So if I was seen with a Westerner, I knew no one when I arrived, but through friends of friends I met some students from Stanford at Beijing University, and an incident that occurred very early on when I arrived was this guy named Frank Hawk, who was a long-haired cowboy hat wearing, blue jean bell bottom wearing with a Mao jacket on top. But someone who had gone to Beijing and learned Chinese and knew a lot of slang. Anyway, this is a friend of a friend. I hadn't actually met him before. And he's like, somehow we got connected. And he said, oh, why don't I pick you up on my bicycle and we'll ride to Tiananmen Square where they're having a big celebration of what they call Qingmingjie, the Sweep the Ancestors Festival.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be mobs of people in Tiananmen. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds fine. And so I hop on his bicycle, my arms around his waist, not realizing how incredibly conspicuous I was right off the bat. We're in China with it's a white guy,
And an Asian woman on the back
Asian
of a
woman,
bike.
and so everyone assumes I'm local, and I'm so unaware. And then we go to Tiananmen Square, and there's a bunch of young kids, and he started like joking around with them with Beijing slang, and there was an expression at the time called "gai mar." It literally means cover the hat. So he was like joking, and they were like laughing their heads off, and more people are crowding around us, and more people, and like soon we're in the middle of this mob just because there's this white guy speaking Chinese slang, and where the mob is swaying, and I literally fell to my knees, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna get trampled to death right
Yeah.
here in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
And then eventually a plainclothes policeman came and sort of parted the ways. That's what we assumed, and we like ran out of there. But my point is that from that moment on, I was being followed because they didn't know who I was. And then it was not until the Monday morning when the office, when they basically followed me back to the dorm, which is where the work unit was. And then on Monday morning, they went to the office and they're like, who is this person? I didn't know this until much later. None of it surprises me. So I was basically being followed. And there were so many situations where I gradually realized to be with Westerners because they would stop me if I tried to go to the Friendship Hotel or the Peking Hotel. I kept saying, but I'm American, and
Right.
it didn't register. I gradually decided to hang out with Chinese, like more and more. And I was like, well, this is good for my language skills. So I met some people there, including the guy that I ended up bringing out who was staying at my parents' house. I almost forced myself to be comfortable in that situation. I was sort of straddling, but I really ended up spending more time with Chinese and made the most of that experience. We looked the same, but then there were differences. That feeling of not being entirely comfortable in a situation, of course, arises.
Yeah.
But I learned so much, and it was a very exciting time. And I will say that period also was what opened me up to the creative industries in China, because there was a flourishing of art and music and filmmaking. And that's what ended up exciting me, is like I could finally meet people and have conversations about creativity, about like, oh, how
Yeah.
did you make this? And what is this? And we talk about things that I never, ever had a chance to do in America.
Do you bring that perspective of, you talked about like forcing yourself to be comfortable, and you talked about like healing your childhood wounds,
Yeah.
right? So do you keep that in the forefront of your mind when you're bringing films like Joy Luck Club, The Rose to mind?
Yeah.
Because being able to see these stories, and not on even the small screen, like the big screen, and your ethnicity isn't the headline. It's just a great story with great
Right.
dynamics, and it's a very human story, both of these films. Does that sort of ride shotgun with you when you make films like The Rose? Is it still
Yeah.
something that
Oh,
people need?
yeah. I mean, it's so instinctive and so automatic now. It's like I don't even have to think about it. I was like, oh, well, this is something that, humanizing us in all our dimensions, in all our histories and backgrounds, and all the nuances and all the things that, again, used to be quietly hidden in our internal lives, as we were just discussing. Let it out, get it out there. And it's relatable. And we've seen, oh my God, it's like revolutionary change in that respect over these however many years.
Right.
And I've just had it in me to be a community builder. I keep starting these things like the short film competition for Asian women, or Asian, particularly that, because I guess I'm trying to create a balance. I see so much of one thing. I'm like, yeah, but what about us? And trying to find some sort of equity, community, and being seen, And so that was really the start of my career, was like, oh, these Chinese films, people should see them so that they see us differently. So I knew instinctively the power of that, because I felt it when I was so excited to see these films in China that were, of all different qualities in many cases, but just the mere fact that I remember even seeing this, some of the films that were kind of a holdover from the Cultural Revolution, propaganda-ish, even ones from the Cultural Revolution. One was called Wu Tai Jie Maids, Stage Sisters from Xiejin. Or I'd see this movie that was almost like a documentary about a woman in Yunnan province who was like singing, like from a tribe, and she was singing this song across the hills, and then the guy from another valley was singing. They had hints of everything that we long for: romance, drama, comedy,
Yeah.
heroism. I just never seen anything like that before, and it just made my brain fire off in ways that I couldn't anticipate. I was like, oh, this can happen, that can happen. And so, yeah, I really owe that experience in China to a lot of what has happened since then.
Look at this evolution now. We have
Yeah.
The Rose.
Each person, I really adore them
Yeah.
all so much. Their music is in my head, but more than that, their personalities, their human. There's Leo is so funny. Jeff is so, that moment where
Yeah.
he's sing saw song, and mental health. They're so human. They're so distinctive, and their camaraderie and their talent that comes together is so incredible. And then the hardships that they
Yes.
went through to get to where they are.
Right.
I mean, it is really triumph of the human spirit, which I think is a story that everybody wants to be reminded of, because we need to be reminded of what makes us human.
Now more than ever. And I love that you're bringing these stories. And I think the evolution of your career from just everything you're doing, both on screen and off, you continue to champion so many important causes and stories and voices that really, really need to be opened up and looked at. And I just want to say thank you for all of that. Not only bringing the Joy Luck Club, but also a film like The Rose, which I think the world really needs to see and be reminded of character, friendship, community.
I hope other people love it. We loved making it. I think it can have a huge impact. It does
Yes.
defy in its own way. It just defies a lot of things that, perceptions that people may have. And so we just have to keep finding these stories that are surprising in whatever way and that are inspirational. If I had one big overall goal in my life right now, it's for the good guys to win. Good guys and gals.
I have to say thank you so much for being one of the good guys and showing us how to do that. But I really hope you can come back in the future and do another episode,
Okay,
Janet.
sure.
I'm going to ask you to sign us off. Will you let me know who you are and what you represent?
Yes. My name is Janet Yang. I like to believe I represent a caring, somewhat concerned community of artists, humanists, and spiritual warriors.
What an incredible conversation with Janet Yang. Truly a Hollywood icon, a pioneer, and someone whose work continues to shape the way stories are told. I feel so lucky to have had the opportunity to sit down with her and hear the story behind The Rose Come Back to Me. This film is in theaters this weekend, February 14th. It's more than a documentary. It's a celebration of friendship, honor, integrity, and the power of being seen for who you are. Watching it, you're going to feel empowered, inspired, and connected to something bigger. Thank you, Janet, for sharing your time, your insights, and for all that you're doing to champion stories and perspectives that need that support. And thank you for sharing your heart with us, Janet. So do yourself a favor, go to theaters this weekend, February 14th, and experience the story for yourself. Reppin is where we move beyond labels and come back to what matters most, being human first. So join me in growing this community. Subscribe, download, and share. Let me know what your thoughts are on this conversation or anything else. You can DM me on Instagram at Reppin_podcast and give me a follow there too. You can also watch this full conversation on YouTube. My handle there is at Reppin Podcast. Thank you again for being here and for listening. Reppin is a Suburban Outlaw Productions. Until next time, stand up and represent.
Rough and rugged.
Represent NY, hold it down.